This past week, I was able to return to Kings Island for my first time since 2018. When I was here, I was able to experience Firehawk right before the park announced its closure. This coaster is my personal favorite in the park after my first visit, so I was sad when it closed for good. However, its replacement was a long-awaited roller coaster that locals have been begging this park to get for many years. This coaster would be Orion, a new B&M Giga coaster that opened back in July of 2020. And let me tell you now that this coaster is a worthy replacement for Firehawk. Man, just what a ride. One thing that made this coaster special for me was that it was my first B&M Giga coaster. These coasters are usually praised for giving some of the best coaster experiences in the world, so I had high expectations going into it. While it may have not met those expectations exactly, it was still a really good coaster that I did enjoy. One thing about this ride is that when you look at the stats, it's only 287 feet tall, but it does have a 300-foot drop. I will say that I do joke around and call it the world's tallest hyper, but after getting a ride on it myself, I officially can agree that this is a Giga coaster. Now, I have always said that Kings Island is a mediocre park with mediocre coasters. Does Orion change that? Not really. I wouldn't call KI a mediocre park anymore, but I definitely would call Orion a mediocre Giga coaster. While I haven't ridden the other two B&M Gigas, I have heard from some of my friends who have ridden either one or both of the Giga coasters, and they say that this one's right in the middle. Fury 325 easily looks like one of the best coasters in the world, and Leviathan, from what I heard, is a taller but less thrilling version of Orion. So I definitely can agree that Orion is a mediocre coaster, which in a way is disappointing. While Kings Island has a great coaster lineup, none of them do anything special that could separate them from other roller coasters of their kind. While Orion is the true standout coaster of Kings Island, since it is the tallest and fastest coaster there, I can agree that it isn't one of the best rides. And don't get me wrong, the stats for this ride are good. We already talked about the height, but 91 miles per hour, 5,321 feet long. It is an astonishing coaster. But stats don't make a ride. So let me talk about my experience with Orion. I was able to get two rides on it. One was in the back, which was right around the park's opening, and one was in the front, which was one of the last rides of the night. So I did get two completely different experiences that I can judge off of. When I walked into the park, I was meeting up with someone to take some pictures, so I didn't want to ride anything. So what I did was walk straight to Orion just to see it in person. And all I can say is, wow. Since I live in Florida, I'm used to seeing smaller and more themed roller coasters. So when I see a 300-foot tall B&M, it makes me wonder how it's even possible. After my photography session, the first thing I did was get in line for Orion. I only waited about 25 minutes for my first ride, and one thing that caught my eye was the theming in the queue line. It wasn't anything truly special, but I did like how Kings Island tried to give the ride a storyline that people could understand by the time they got on the ride. That was my biggest complaint with Mystic Timbers. The ride has a decent finale, but until you were on the lift hill, you didn't really know why you're not supposed to go in the shed, so that was confusing. Orion, on the other hand, does a good job with explaining it enough to understand. Plus, I did like how Kings Island gave tribute to some of the defunct rides in the building. When I entered the station, I did like the Area 72 flags that were hanging from the ceiling. It gave it an interesting effect. Plus, this ride has a soundtrack from Imascore, which made the setup even better. When I finally got on the ride, I put on my seatbelt and pulled down my clamshell restraint. And since this coaster has only been open for a couple months at the time of this video, the seats and restraints felt very new, which was a nice touch that I did enjoy. So now I'm going to talk about my first ride. I sat in the back, dispatched out of the station, and started going up this massive lift hill. And I mean massive. It felt so much longer than it actually was because you kept on going higher and higher. It felt never-ending. When you finally reached the top, you crested down this massive 300-foot drop. When I reached the top, I started getting a little nervous because this was such a massive drop. Plus, I had tons of room on my first ride. Once we started going down, I was ejected out of my seat and just kept floating for what felt like forever. This drop, in my opinion, was the best part of the ride in the back row. It never ends, which is what made it so good. After this, you go into this wave turn, which was extremely underwhelming on both of my rides. It didn't really do anything that made it special. No sideways airtime, no laterals, and no hang time. It was just there. It is a unique element that was interesting to experience, but it really wasn't anything special. After the wave turn, you head into what I thought was the worst element on the ride. It didn't do anything special. It wasn't intense, didn't give me any laterals, it was just there, like the wave turn. After that, you head into a speed hill, which is the element that gives you the best airtime on the ride. Personally, I thought the speed hill was one of the best. You don't really get ejected into the element, you just float over it with tremendous speed, which is what made it such a good element. You then head into a massive airtime hill, which didn't give the best moment of airtime in the world, but it was a fairly strong element. Since SeaWorld Orlando is my home park, I've ridden Mako over 150 times, so when you experience the 5-second floater hill on a weekly basis, this airtime hill isn't truly special. After that hill, you then go into a massive helix. I'm not gonna lie, I actually thought this helix was pretty good. It isn't the most intense helix in the world, but I would say it's the most intense part of the ride, and I definitely would take this over Goliath's helix. After this, you dive down and twist up into the final element. You dive down a steep airtime hill and head up into the final brake run. If you're in the back, this airtime hill gives some great ejector airtime, and if you're in the front, the hill into the brake run gives the best ejector on the ride. While the brake run may seem really long, it did allow them to run 3 trains, and with those quick operations, the line would always keep moving at a decent speed. After my first ride, I really enjoyed this coaster. It was glossy smooth, gave some decent airtime, and was super fast. When I rode this coaster for my second time in the front, it was 10:30 at night, so it was pitch black. And since this coaster goes back by the forest, it is really dark towards those back sections. The drop was once again never ending, but one thing that I loved about it was how much faster the ride feels in the front. When you hit the bottom of the drop, you hear nothing except the wind is zooming past you. Plus, the ride was running much faster than it was in the afternoon. After my 2 rides, I decided that this is the best coaster at Kings Island. I did prefer this over Firehawk, but from what I've ridden, I would still take Mako over Orion. Mako is still my favorite B&M roller coaster, with Orion being a close number 2. I definitely think Orion is an amazing coaster, and that night ride left me speechless when I hit the brake run. If I had to rate Orion, I would give it an 8 out of 10. In the end, it's not that intense, it doesn't give any laterals, and its airtime isn't the best even compared to other coasters in the park. But the speed and overall experience makes it such a fun coaster. It just proves that a coaster doesn't need all the airtime or all the inversions in the world. It just needs a fun layout that makes it a re-rideable roller coaster that I could never get tired of. One more thing to add is that this coaster didn't feel short. While it isn't the longest coaster in the world, I was satisfied with the length by the time I hit the final brake run. In the end, Orion is definitely worth your time when you visit Kings Island. I hope you guys enjoyed my review, and if you enjoyed the content and want to see more, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already yet for content just like this every week. This is Hunter from Theme Park Hunting. I'll see you guys later, and follow the thrill.